Our guest interviewer today is Mr. Don Zalewa. Mr. Zalewa has a BA in Industrial Psychology, MBA, and is a Ph.D. candidate in Organizations and Management. Don has held many senior-level positions, including Vice President of Administration, Vice President of Human Resources, at several manufacturing firms in the United States and Germany, where he managed the startup, relocation, and restructuring of manufacturing facilities. His chief responsibilities were expansive and covered finance and accounting, information and office services, manufacturing, facilities management, human resources, plus intellectual property and legal services. As a senior consultant with PeopleSoft, Don was involved in project management and application software implementation. Mr. Zalewa has also held industrial board positions with Delnor Community Hospital, now Cadence Health, and Elgin Community College. Currently, he is the managing director of Austin Ryan Associates, a consulting firm working in the functional areas of management and human resources. Don has been an adjunct professor with Keller Graduate School of Management since 1988 and a member of senior faculty since 1989. During this same time, he has actively shared his professional experiences and practitioner insights from nearly 25 years of consulting with several Fortune 500 companies, covering the full spectrum of management and HR functions. Don's leadership is recognized in Who's Who in America, Who's Who in the World, and Who's Who in Business and Finance. Having a perspective of Mr. Zalewa's background, we are now ready to move into his conversation with Mr. Hamid Noorani, the author of Rational Decision Making and Power, the Modern Doctrine. Mr. Noorani is also the founder and president of Powerful Methods, whose mission is to develop a new generation of leaders who serve the world by inspiring ordinary people to produce extraordinary results. You are about to hear about the latest developments in science and systems thinking. The topics include the application of physics and the scientific method to reality, learning and decision-making, corporate social responsibility, balancing profit maximization, and rational decision-making for a brighter future for the love of the world.
Good afternoon, Mr. Noorani. In reviewing your book, on page 8 of Questions on Rational Decision-Making, a major premise and foundation of your rational decision-making model is based on science, and specifically physics and the scientific method. You suggest on page 8 that the subject of physics can be used to describe reality. I generally agree with your position, although not phenomenon in physics can be easily explained as logical or even real. If we consider quantum physics as an example, I'm sure you could see my point. Does your definition of reality address or adjust for unexplained phenomenon?
From a Newtonian time, every engineer has been trained to believe that reality is a deterministic system. Because Newton's first law said a body in rest remains at rest unless acted on by a force. So we are thought to believe that every phenomenon must have a cause behind it. And if we understand the cause, we can predict the phenomenon. While Isaac Newton was right in saying that in outlining the principles of physics, there are still issues with aggregates. Notice Isaac Newton says a body at rest. Normally reality does not deal with a body. Normally reality deals with aggregates of bodies.
Yes.
And systems thinking shows that whenever there are sensitive processes, then the outcome of the system cannot be predicted. So in statistics, we talk about random variables. What are random variables? They say, well, a variable that changes at random. But if you look at it from a broader perspective, there are variables that do change randomly in reality. And the sources of random variables are either sensitive processes, population variations, or in human systems, decisions. Every time somebody makes a decision, there is a variability because we cannot predict the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say deterministic system, we are saying that if you know the condition of the input and the process, you can predict the output. With sensitive processes, even if you know the condition of the input and the process, because the process is sensitive, you cannot predict the output. For example, in statistics, we talk about flipping a coin or throwing a dice, that you don't know what outcome you're going to get. With the flipping of a coin, you don't know whether you're going to get head or tail. With throwing a dice, you don't know what number you're going to get. It doesn't mean that Newton was wrong. It just means that the process is so sensitive that you cannot possibly predict the outcome. So that is the basis of quantum mechanics, that the process of acting on an electron is so sensitive. The energy impacting the electron can make it move in any direction at any speed that you cannot know with the accuracy where it's located or how fast it's going. Heisenberg principle.
Moving to page 9 in your book, the second component of your rational model is the understanding of self. Looking upon Maslow and cognitive learning theory, it suggests that individuals may not have a complete understanding of themselves at any given time. How does your definition account for or accommodate for this possible difference?
Theories are based on a rational model. Sometimes people who espouse theories are not aware of the rational model that actually shapes their theories. Few of us are aware of the origins of our own thoughts. And sometimes we believe we know everything there is to know, and yet our thoughts are biased by worldview that may have been shaped thousands of years ago, that led to a rational model that itself guides theories. When you formulate a theory, basically you're asking a question from nature, from reality. The kind of questions you ask is shaped by your rational model. So sometimes we ask questions that are incomplete. For example, we ask question, is light a particle or a wave? And then we never get the right answer. It all depends on the kind of questions you ask. When I was a student in England, the profs always like to say an answer can be only as intelligent as the question.
I agree. I do agree.
So yes, there are voids in our understanding. There are voids. We have problem understanding ourselves, and this is why we have problem understanding other people. And systems thinking offers a profile, a universal profile of humans that actually helps us understand ourselves and hence other people. So if you start from this premise, from this worldview, then you have a greater understanding. And of course, what I say in terms of the human profile can be debated, can be challenged. I called it a common human profile. It's our common humanity. And it's derived based on systems thinking. And much of it is actually derived through deductive reasoning. So if you start from that premise, then you ask a different set of questions. You formulate a different set of theories. Because the evolution of knowledge, after you develop your theories, that those theories shape your thought processes shape your actions bring you experiences. But what you want to do is to refine your theories through your experiences and then integrate your theories in order to create a redefined rational model so that it can inform your worldview. So when I say science explains everything, I'm offering a worldview, which is not actually mine. It started with Isaac Newton. It started with Galileo. That the world around us, the cosmos, is not a process at the whims of a God. Is actually very predictable. If you know the laws of physics, you can actually know what is going on with the rotation of the planets around the sun or the behavior of objects. And this is the foundation of all our science and technology. So it's really nothing new. I'm not saying anything new. What is novel in this worldview that I'm presenting with systems thinking as the modern scientific philosophy is that I'm expanding the knowledge of natural sciences into social sciences. Because from physics, we can explain economic principles. And once we explain economic principles, then we define an organization as a self-sustaining system. And then that gives us the foundation, the rational model foundation, for new theories that ask entirely different questions.
It's my belief, and I believe you may share this, that we are not looking at only a quantitative approach, but a qualitative one as well to arrive at our answers, I would suggest.
Qualitative approach, you're exactly right. Some people have problem, especially engineers, have problem with qualitative approach.
I agree.
Because we are told to deal with numbers. Look for cause-effect relationships, and that is all that matters. But if you think about it, nothing that satisfies us as humans can be measured quantitatively.
Right. Intrinsic, isn't it?
It's amazing, because what satisfies us in terms of motivation has nothing to do with any numbers. What gives us satisfaction in terms of comfort or how we define luxury has nothing to do with the numbers.
Right.
What satisfies us in a relationship has nothing to do with numbers.
I agree.
So qualitative evaluation is a necessary, because somebody once said there are things that can be counted but do not count, and there are things that count but cannot be counted.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with you. Page 45, alluding to that particular page number, in looking at Scott's discussion, which he published in 1981, he discusses the theoretical construct of irrationality and a discussion of the scientific management framework. Scott uses the philosophical school of scientific management, also Weber's theory of bureaucracy, and also the administrative behavior model. Although Scott's rationality and how it is related to open systems and how the environment work has an impact on them, and also Weber's theory is based in systems design, and finally Simon's theory is based on contingency theory. My question basically is that there are several similarities between Scott, Weber, Simon, and also your definition of a rational model. How may your model differ or maybe be similar from Scott, Weber's, and Simon's work?
Well, actually, what I've explained in the two books, Power the Modern Doctrine and Making Rational Decisions, has similarities to the works of many others. I first explain the origins of my own thoughts to follow up our earlier discussion. My intellectual heroes all are Brits. Is Newton, John Locke, Adam Smith, and Charles Darwin.
Okay.
And why are they my intellectual heroes? Is because they each offered a new rational model that shaped the way we think and the kind of questions we ask. So systems thinking actually itself is not new. First thorough writing of it was by Ludwig von Bertalanffy. I think 1924 was first book or his papers published. It was further followed by others, J. Forrester, Peter Senge, and I'm actually a latecomer into the field. But I arrived at systems thinking from the perspective of modern physics. The question for me was, if we were going to explain reality in its most comprehensive sense, in its fullest sense, so that we don't miss anything, how would we explain it? What would be our model of reality in its fullest sense? So if you read this rational model, you see the similarities with the works of many others. Right away you see the similarities with Newton, with Adam Smith, with John Locke, with Charles Darwin. It says that all that exists is made of matter and energy, changing with the forces acting on it according to laws of physics. Now, Isaac Newton could have said that. It says,
I agree. Yeah.
Every change takes place in the context of a system influenced by the whole and influencing the whole. Now, this is my contribution. But others also have said that. Others have said that if you want to study, say, qualitative research, you have to contextualize it. Because what you are observing, the phenomena you are observing, really is impacted by the context. And what I'm adding to it is that the phenomena you're observing or studying also impacts its context. The influence goes both ways. That is my contribution. Then he says, every change requires a transfer of energy. That comes from Isaac Newton. The body at rest stays at rest unless a force acted on it. Action by the distance traveled is energy. Of course, at the time of Newton, the idea of energy was not created. It was formalized later on. He says every change takes time. That comes from relativity, that there is a limit to speed. You cannot have infinite speed. You cannot have a change that takes place in zero time. It is physically impossible to have a change taking place in zero time. Then he says matter and energy can produce organisms. This is just observation. And what are organisms? Systems that can sustain their activities by absorbing energy from their context. This is direct observation. It doesn't take a lot of intellect to say such a thing, it's just direct observation. Organisms face threat and opportunities from their context. Now, this again comes the work of Porter on strategy in terms of threats and opportunities of organizations in the macro environment. It's nothing new. Then he says to survive, they need to protect their health, growing capability, compete with other organisms for energy and space, cooperate for win-win results, and adapt to the changing conditions of the context. Again, any strategy book could tell you the same thing. Then he says organisms can be intelligent, capable of observing, reasoning, deciding, acting, executing, and learning. Again, this is direct observation. So what I'm saying, the rational model that I'm offering is novel because it paints a picture that includes not just inanimate objects, but also organisms and their organizations. So I'm creating one rational model that can be applied more universally than any one before it.
Okay.
Yes, from these you can see the similarities to the works of many. But the point I was trying to make is that from this diagram, from this rational model, you can drive your profile. And this profile, I have to present this to many classes and ask the students to challenge it. And no one could add or subtract from it. So what it's telling you is that you understand yourself first. And your profile is identical to the profile of every blessed member of the human family. So you have plenty of similarities, but also as you grow, you have diversity. All our similarities are sources of economic wealth creation. All our diversity are also sources of wealth creation. So the idea that I belong to this group, you belong to that group, these divisions are absolutely meaningless. There is only one human family. So this is very novel. Somebody listing all our qualities, all our profile, and showing that we are, in essence, indistinguishable.
Yeah.
And it shows you that throughout human history, for 3,000 years, we have tried to divide the human family into different nations, into different religions, into different races, into different ethnicities. All of that are actually irrelevant. Everything that we have found to divide the human family are actually totally irrelevant in practical terms. So this insight that systems thinking offers qualifies it as a philosophy because it offers a rational model, because it offers a worldview. It really qualifies it as a philosophy. The worldview that offered by systems thinking is this. It gives you a definition of what is a system. And for example, you may compare my work with the work of Ed Deming or Peter Senge. The distinction of my work is based on this definition. Ed Deming also talks about systems and manufacturing facilities, but his definition is not very sharp and clear as this one. This one is derived directly from laws of physics. Peter Senge talks about system, again doesn't give you a clear, sharp definition. What is a system, what is not a system? My work says a system is a segment of a space where a particle of matter is altered, which means just about everything that occupies a space is a system. Because every time you identify a segment of a space, something is going on in that segment of a space. You cannot have a segment of a space with nothing going on in it.
Agreed.
So this is what qualifies it as a philosophy. Because once you see that everything is a system, then defining our role in that worldview becomes easy. We are designers and managers of systems, which means everything that we do, every moment of our lives, we are designing and managing some system. And the value of defining these two concepts, a worldview and our role, is that when you put the two together, you can drive the rational model. So this is the level of contribution that this modern scientific philosophy is making.
On page 57, the question I have is, how does learning in your model affect our instinctive systems, and will the probability for making a correct decision ever become higher as a result of it?
From principles of system thinking, we can draw a decision cycle, a rational process of steps we need to follow in the right sequence in making any major decision, such as strategic initiatives. And part of it is defining our objectives. And when we define our objectives, some of our subjective preferences naturally get into it. For example, you want to buy a house, you like it pleasant. What is pleasant is to you. It's very subjective. But you make a decision, you rank it. The way we incorporate subjective criteria into decision making is that we create an attribute scale. Because subjective, we discussed earlier about qualitative research and things that are qualitative, they cannot be measured objectively. But we can measure them as objectively as possible by creating an attribute scale. For example, if you want your house to be pleasant, you define what would be the most pleasant house, what would be number 0 pleasant house, what would be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. By defining those categories, then you can place various houses that you have scouted and into a ranking. That allows you to do the comparison so that you get the most value for the cost that you incur.
Also on page 57, you described different kinds of benefits for oneself, such as pleasure, security, and growth. These points appear to be closely tied to Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. How does your model differ or possibly agree with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Well, Maslow is only that. Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs is about motivation. And what Maslow says is that people have the lowest physiological needs, motivate them most, and then they go to higher order, like social stature, before they go to the highest, which is self-actualization. Now, research shows that, number one, those ranking are not the right sequence. Number two, people don't necessarily follow one step after another to move up. For example, Mother Teresa jumped a step all the way up to self-actualization. So you have to ask yourself, what is the value of it? What is it telling about us humans? New research has shown that other things motivate us. For example, sense of belonging. Maslow doesn't talk about that at all. There is a famous quote in the military that a man will not sell his life to you, but will give it to you for a piece of colored ribbon. Some assign it to Napoleon. I don't know who's the original, but we can see the essence of it, that just to belong, we are willing to sacrifice plenty. And Maslow doesn't touch on that. They need to be needed. Let me show you the profile that I showed you earlier. What I have derived from systems thinking is that we have innate needs. We have the need for validation. We have the need for stimulation. We have the need to belong. We have the need to love. We have the need to be needed. We have the need to be treasured. We need to love. We need someone that we can love. Loving that person gives us purpose. Parents understand this. See how many childless couples do just about anything to get a child. They go through surgery, they go through all the long process of adopting a child. Why? Because we need someone to love. We need to make a positive impact in the lives of others. That gives us self-validation. That is the basis of how we assign self-worth. I'm good, I'm worthy because of all these positive contributions I'm making in the lives of others. And the irony is that there are 7 billion people on the planet. You and I can love every one of those 7 billion for free. And it is in our enlightened self-interest to do so. It keeps us on the rational path when we love someone else.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. It's not exactly easy to do that, however.
Well,
it's difficult.
What is difficult about it? What is difficult to wish everyone on the planet life, health, and growth? I'm not making this statement out of sentiment. This is purely out of economics. Because if you look at the business system, here you have a business. Investors put the investment into the business decides what to produce. They buy factors of production from suppliers. They take it into their operations, they produce products, sell it to the customers. They get the revenue. From the revenue, they pay their cost. What is left is gross profit. Government takes the taxes. Net profit goes to the investors. And all these activities take place in the context of a community. If you look at these, you see that the relationship between the investors and the business is a win-win relationship. Because if one of them loses, they're not going to play game. Both miss the opportunity of a win-win relationship. Business is winning, so are the investors. If the investors don't get a good return on their business, they're going to ditch this investment and go put their investment somewhere else. Relationship between suppliers and business is also win-win by the virtue of two economic entities entering into a transaction freely, which means each had a choice of transactions to get entered into. The fact that you're entering into this transaction proves that each saw this transaction as their best available option. You can challenge me anytime you want to.
No, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Relationship between the business and customers, likewise, is win-win because two economic entities are freely engaging into this transaction. Government, of course, wins. They get up the taxes. But even there, they provide regulation, goods, and services that benefit everyone, including the business. Community wins because more wealth is created, more jobs are created. So here you have a system where everyone can potentially win without anyone becoming a loser. But there is a greater point about this diagram. Because if you notice, these investors are also investors, suppliers, and customers of other businesses. These suppliers are also investors, customers, suppliers of other businesses. These customers are also investors, suppliers, and customers of other businesses. Therefore, a business system is a node in a network of interconnected, interdependent, win-win relationship that spans the entire global economy.
I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. However, the system, in order to work at its optimum value or performance, needs to have an equilibrium of everybody cooperating, as you are suggesting. Although I believe that there's more conflict in what's really going on in businesses in general. Nevertheless, I believe your model would hope that we would arrive at working together in order to achieve the goal. I'm just suggesting that it's a little more complex and difficult at times
To get there.
to get there.
Yeah, but trade theory actually answers your concern. Trade theory, comparative advantage, says that here you have a chain of value. Porter calls it industry chain of value. Every economic entity in the chain has the natural economic incentive to occupy the part of that industry value chain that gives them the highest value.
For all parties concerned.
Each economic this business is going to engage into operation of one particular segment of the total industry value chain that captures, utilizes their core competency, that allows them leverage their core competency for the greatest profit. The profit motivation in this industry value chain brings each party to produce the part of the chain they can do most effectively and most efficiently. In other words, at the lowest opportunity cost.
Yes, and the greatest value.
That's right, greatest value for themselves. You're exactly right. So through globalization, we have created a network of interdependent relationships that are win-win, and value added by one party adds value to everyone else.
Right, multiple effect.
That's right. Likewise, if one party is diminished in their capacity to add value, everyone else is that much poorer.
I agree.
Yeah. So it's telling you that actually it is in our enlightened self-interest to promote the productivity of every blessed member of the human family.
Sometimes we get in our own way, though, and
Well,
we hope to eliminate that.
The problem is that we have for too long defined our objectives in very narrow and immediate terms rather than in the broadest perspective and over the longest term.
Agreed. I agree. Thank you. On page 59 of your book, how is your definition of being sovereign applied to non-exempt employees? And an example would be, in many third world countries, and this gets at the model that we were just discussing here, employees give up their rights and also give up the right to grow and learn. How does your model account for possibly these differences?
Workers are providing factors of production to the firm. And sometimes they are locked up in third world countries, and they are not allowed free choice. As long as they have a free choice, economics see no problem with it. If, for example, Nike wants to make their shoes in Indonesia and there are hundreds of workers lining up to take their job, well, you know, there is win-win because those workers are freely entering into this engagement. But, for example, I was watching a video clip last night that showed the shrimp production in Thailand, that sometimes these workers have their passports removed, they are not allowed to leave the factory, they are locked up, they have to work long hours, they are not always paid. Then that is a huge problem. But that is not just a problem for the worker or for the business. Based on this model, that is a problem we should all be concerned.
I agree.
That's right. Because if workers are being deprived from their sovereignty, from their natural options to maximize value for themselves, we are all poorer in proportion.
I agree, and I wish more people would believe in the system as you're suggesting.
Yes, but there are barriers to shifting the mindset because we have come to define wealth, commercial wealth, as the only measure of success. In modern America, who is successful? Those who are rich and famous. If you are rich and famous, you are successful, which means you have deserved it. And if you are not rich and not successful, well, you must have deserved it.
Yes, and there's a problem there, isn't there?
That's right. So in terms of value creation, in terms of the common human profile, then you will see that there are many people who add enormous value, and they don't really measure their success in terms of dollars. It's a personal choice, whether you want to measure your life's work in terms of dollars or not. For example, teachers. You and I teach. We don't measure our success in terms of dollars because we know that we are developing the future generation of leaders for the world.
I agree.
We are making a contribution to the world, and we are actually grateful for the opportunity to do so.
I couldn't agree more.
And then I look at you and say, you are contributing to the world. I love you that much because of it. So nurses contribute to the patient, sometimes abusive patients, but they are grateful for the opportunity to do so. Or, there are many professions who choose not to measure their life's work based on dollars. Again, economically, there is a choice. You have choices. You can do one thing or you can do something else.
But the value of the intrinsic form can not necessarily outweigh the value of the physical, tangible kinds of items. There needs to be a blending of both, ethical, morals, and wealth is nice. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But
commercial wealth. Yeah.
There also becomes a responsibility that's associated with it as well.
That's right. You're exactly right. Because that is the very definition of morality. The definition of morality that I've offered in my books is recognizing our obligations to others. It's distinct from definition of ethics, which means maintaining the system that maintain us. So ethics is very pragmatic, whereas morality is an obligation we choose to recognize.
And I agree. Yes, it needs to have both there. You need to have both there, really, to be a good global economy kind of person who's really thinking about everyone rather than oneself only, or one's own community, if you will, which could be a business itself.
From this model, you see that the ultimate rational strategy is to love the world. So loving the world is not just a sentimental, ideal thing to do, but is actually the only sole, ultimate rational strategy you could possibly follow.
I'm not sure if my wife would allow me to love others, so I'll need to discuss that with her, but nevertheless, I agree with your point, Hank. Thank you. Thank you. Moving back to Maslow here, how does your definition of commercial wealth differ from that maybe Maslow would suggest?
There are two kinds of wealth we enjoy, we create and enjoy. One is commercial wealth, the other is social wealth. And commercial wealth is measured in terms of dollars and cents, whereas social wealth is not measurable.
Mm-hmm.
Some societies leverage their commercial wealth, some leverage their social wealth. Here we have the hierarchy of objectives of an individual. And the ultimate objective of every one of us is to get the joy of living. And there are only three processes for us to get the joy of living. One is that life itself is sweet, gives us pleasure. The other process is through the things we want, the things that please us, gives us the joy of living. The third process is through achieving what we choose as a mission so that we get the joy of living. All three processes require wealth, commercial wealth and social wealth. Commercial wealth we compete for, social wealth we cooperate for. Commercial wealth can be exchanged between strangers, social wealth is mostly between people you know. Commercial wealth is exchanged with dollars, social wealth is exchanged of gifts. Mm-hmm. We offer gifts. In Anglo-Saxon cultures, we rely on commercial wealth because it's measurable, we can keep it in the bank. In Latin cultures, they leverage mostly their social wealth in terms of their relationships. We need both kinds.
Yes, I agree.
This is the distinction that I draw. Because if you notice here in this diagram, your commercial and social wealth are actually your disposable assets. These are assets you dispose in getting your life, the things you want, and the things you choose as a mission. There is another important asset, and that is your productive assets. Your sovereignty is your productive asset. Your capital, skills, health, and relationships are things you leverage in order to produce disposable assets with which you sustain life, get the things you want, and achieve your mission. And your productive assets are actually created because of your creative assets. Your integrity is actually your creative asset. It is with integrity that you create productive assets with which you can then utilize to generate disposable assets. Notice in these three kinds of assets, there is a certain relationship between them. Disposable assets you could lose. Your money can go away, your relationship can fall apart. Your productive assets are more enduring. But you may lose your health, you may lose your capital, you may lose your relationships. Then the only thing you are left with is your creative asset. Circumstances may take all of this away from you, but this only you can destroy. No one else can take that away from you. And that is rest under your capacity to love and your capacity to learn. So while we have all these three categories of assets, we have a disposable asset, productive asset, and creative assets. Our focus mostly is on this commercial wealth. We ignore everything else.
Yes, I agree.
Here we may compete, but for everything else we can cooperate. There is no competition on sovereignty. There is no competition on integrity and your creative assets.